CEE,
Central Europe Explained,
an IDM podcast series
powered by Erste Group. Episode 13: Before and After Joining the EU: Persistent Challenges in Central Europe, with Dostál. Warm welcome to everyone to today's CEE, Central Europe Explained podcast episode. My name is Martínek and I am a research associate at the Institute for the Danube Region and Central Europe in Vienna. In the couple of last episodes, we discussed the conditions, challenges, and opportunities related with the process of becoming an EU member state. Going further in the discussion, we will now look at the changes that occurred after accessing the EU by the so-called young European member state, with focus on Central Europe. Before and after joining the EU: Persistent Challenges in Central Europe is the title of today's episode. To discuss this topic, I am pleased to welcome Mr. Dostál, Research Director of the Prague-based Research Center AMO, Association for International Affairs. Hello, Vítek, and thank you for joining us today.
Hello, and thank you for the invitation.
Together, as I already said, we will today concentrate on the persistent challenges for Central European countries arising from the integration of these into the EU structure. Let's start with the very basic question. The Central European countries, and here I am speaking about the Visegrad countries, are members of the European Union for more than 15 years. Looking at the current political, economic, and social situation in these countries, what are, in your opinion, perhaps unexpected consequences of these countries' membership in the European Union?
Yes, that's actually a very good question, because when we look at Central Europe or the Visegrad Group countries, and when we try to compare them today with the situation in 2004, when these countries with huge happiness joined the EU, then we have to understand that, not only the Central European countries changed, but also Western European countries have changed, the EU has changed. So it is some kind of a process where we, of course, have many challenges. We have witnessed the economic crisis in 2000, from 2008 till 2011. We've had the so-called migration crisis in Europe in 2015. We've got a coronavirus right now. So these issues had definitely a huge impact on not only Central Europe, but the EU as a whole. But what we see is a gradual integration of the Central Europe or Visegrad Group countries. Of course, that the accession is the major step, but to be fully adopted as a member, it takes some time. Culturally, intellectually, politically, economically, technically. We've got a transition periods, we've got politicians who had to learn how to behave in the EU with all these structures. And of course, it took some time. And also, thanks to the accession of the Central European countries, the EU has changed. It had a huge impact on how the EU works today and how successful the project is. The huge enlargement in 2004 was one of the major successes of European integration.
Thank you very much. I would like maybe to ask you, because for me it's interesting that you said the politicians should learn how to behave or how to be able to behave in the EU structure. Could you maybe shed more light on this topic?
Well, when there was a regime change in a turn from 1980s to 1990s in Central European countries, everyone believed that our mission is to catch up with the West, to become members of the EU and NATO. So we reach the end of history. And that was the mission for 1990s. But suddenly, when we became members of NATO and EU, we learned that that is not the end of the history. So there was a need for some kind of a change of the mindset. It takes some time. Some politicians think that somehow they have to still compete with the EU, that Brussels is the enemy of us. It is easy to sell it. So that takes some time, but I don't think that it is the case of the Central European countries only. The same you have in Austria, the same you have in the Netherlands, the same you had in Britain with its consequences. So it is not a special thing, but this process of learning was visible in Central and Eastern Europe.
You already mentioned that, of course, it takes some time. I would like to go back maybe to this change of mindset. You mentioned what is the state of affairs when it comes to change of mindset? Of course, it doesn't relate only to Central Europe, as you said, it relates to Eastern Europe, Southeastern Europe. But what do you think? In which period are we in currently? Did the change of mindset occur already, or it's not the case? Will that occur in the foreseeable future?
Here, I think we have to differentiate the four Visegrad countries, because we witnessed the four different stories of the integration of brains into the EU. In the case of Poland, it is a large country. It is, of course, one of the important members because of its geopolitical impact and military strength. And Poland has always been more self-confident than the other countries, I believe. For Polish political thought, integrated Europe without Poland is a nonsense. And that's kind of an attitude they have towards the EU. They are much more self-confident in setting the expectations to it. And therefore, I think that Polish political class is much more mature in dealing with the EU structure of the country.
Thank you very much. So you touched upon all the benefits and ability of political leaders or national governments, member of the national governments of Central European countries within the EU. You mentioned the deep EU integration, but how all this actually goes in line with this recent or current anti-EU attitude in these countries, as you mentioned already, regarding the refugee crisis and the quotas, or the negotiations on the EU Green Deal, or recently also the rule of law and the control mechanism, which was somehow related to the future EU budget. How all these things, this approach or this attitude of these national governments goes in line with the EU integration? And you also already mentioned that it's the Hungary, for example, caused headaches. So could you explain that, how it works actually?
Well, you mentioned a very interesting thing, that these approaches are anti-EU approaches. Well, I think that this perspective, it makes our analysis perhaps too easy. We have to look into the details. None of these countries they would like to discuss something like departure, leaving, withdrawal from the EU. We've got some politicians. They're mainly in the Czech Republic, some extremists in Slovakia, but none of them is very serious and has a huge impact on the government. In the case of Poland, the same is the case of Slovakia, Hungary. We've got a very huge support of the population for the membership in the. Of course, the Czech Republic is a bit more complicated story, but at least in these three countries, we've got the huge approval of the EU membership. What is the case and problem here is that sometimes these countries voice different opinions on the initiatives which are coming from the European Commission, from some EU member states. And of course, it causes a political debate, what actually is quite natural. In some political arena, you hardly ever have the same voices, the same opinions. What is the trouble for Central Europe is the fact that the different opinions are not always accompanied with plans how to solve some situation. That was the case of the so-called migration crisis in 2015, which was very smartly used politically by Viktor Orban, which was connected with some extremist rhetorics in Central Europe. And there was a lack of any own plan how to solve the situation together with international norms and laws which are there. And it was very difficult to find a solution. Instead of trying to find a solution, the hard rhetorics was presented there. Still, I wouldn't put these countries and the politicians in charge into a basket of those with the anti-EU attitude or anti-European policies. The situation is much more complex.
You already touched upon the issue that the majority of population is actually in favor of the EU and European integration. And I think one topic which is quite related to this issue is maybe not all the achievements and benefits of the European Union are visible enough in the respective countries of Central Europe. It seems quite often that on the regional level, the EU is not perceived as strong. Therefore, the support for the EU is comparatively lower there. Do you think, is it an issue of communication on the EU side, or is it an issue of reluctance on the side of national governments, or is there lacking some sort of infrastructure which would allow the EU to get in touch directly with the local actors to show the achievements and benefits of the EU membership of these countries? What is your opinion about raising awareness about the EU among the ordinary citizens?
I think that, in general, citizens in Central Europe are aware of the importance of the EU. The question is whether they approve the deeds which they consider to be the activities of the EU, whether they consider them to be positive or negative. In general, the power of the EU is understood and sometimes even overestimated. We've got, again, different stories. I would like to concentrate on two countries I know the best, the Czech Republic and Poland. In Poland, as I said, Poles I think they are still the nation which is the biggest lover of the EU. They really perceive the membership as very important. And as I said, for Poles, European integration without Poland is a nonsense. They believe that Poland can play an important role in the EU, and they see how the European funds contribute to the development of the country. And this development of the country is not questioned by the political elite. Yes, we've got some kind of a new narrative in Poland. The question how much, so to say, integration of the internal market contributes to the future development of the Polish economy, so it does not fall into the middle income trap, etc., etc. But in general, the economic integration is considered to be a huge success. And you can see it in Poland when you travel through the country. You see that in places where 15, 20 years there was nothing, you've got a new railroads, highways, infrastructure in general. In the case of the Czech Republic, I think that the main problem is that the expectation about the integration into the EU was too high. If you look at the opinion polls and read what people believed would be the change when we finally become members, then you see that people expected a better political culture, better administration, less bureaucracy, what is interesting, and things which the EU itself cannot bring. That is up to the political elite. That is up to the state administration itself. This dream disappeared in 2005, 2006, 2007. Everything was not so rosy. There was a domestic political crisis, fell of the government in the middle of the EU Council presidency, and then the economic slowdown. So These factors definitely contributed to the situation when the Czechs do not think that the EU is so exceptional as it was portrayed in 1990s, and they have to find a new narrative because the narrative of 1990s failed. It is possible to find a new narrative, I think, but it will take some time.
Thank you. So, what narrative do you think should be developed in order to integrate even more not only the Central European countries, but probably also the East European and Southeastern European countries? What is the narrative which would be the driving force in the future in order to create a more integrated, concise Europe?
I think it is a mixture of the things which need to be done and ideas which have to be accepted. What we've got here in Europe is some kind of a lack of trust between the East and West. It has been much said about the East-West divide. When you look into the policies, when you study the policy areas where we actually think that there is some kind of a divide between the East and the West, then you hardly find a clear dividing line between the Western members of the European EU and the Eastern members. So it is in our minds, and we have to find a way how to deal with it. The problem is that since the Central and Eastern European countries are aspiring for becoming the members of the EU or to become finally again part of Europe, this old Honduras idea that the Central Europe was kidnapped by some kind of Asian hordes was still there in 1990s. And this idea of the return is still with us. The impact is that, first of all, when I speak to the Western Europeans, I say that the problem is that we know you better than you know us. And therefore, sometimes Western Europeans are surprised that there is some history in Central Europe, which suddenly reappears on the surface and which has an impact on the political decisions and which has an impact on how people think about politics. When we speak about Britain, then we say, okay, we know that they have been always a bit separated. They had their imperium. They are different. When we speak about French, and we say, okay, yeah, we know that it's a huge country and they have big aspirations and grandeur and everything. We all understand that. But we cannot approach, for example, Poland in a way that we just say, okay, they are still not that many years in the EU, only 15, and they have to grow up. That is not an approach how you speak with your partners. Perhaps it is something different than the fact that these countries are not mature enough. They have something behind. They will shape and co-shape the future of the EU. So this mutual understanding is one of the things we have to acknowledge. And at the same time, Central and Eastern European countries have to understand that it is our Europe, that it is our future, our destiny, and that we co-shape, really, in fact, co-shape it. I think that it is acknowledged in some countries, not that much in my country, in the Czech Republic. It will take some time. And we have to show that we've got an impact, and it is a positive impact. An impact that goes in line with what people actually think and expect, what people actually expect from the EU. There are many examples, and that is a task for the future communication on the EU in my country.
Speaking about the future and shaping of the European Union, my final question would be, what is, in your opinion, the role of Central Europe or the future prospects of the Central European countries when we look at the year, for example, 2030, 2034, once all these countries will be member of the EU for 30 years? What do you think? What is the future role of the Central Europe?
Central Europe has very often been a source of a conflict, which then very often grew into international conflict. We've got religious wars, we've got First and Second World War. And nowadays, the Central Europe is an area of stability, of the economic growth, of cooperation. We've got to remember that the accession to the EU did not mean only the integration of the Central and Eastern European countries into the Western Europe, but also an unprecedented integration of the Central Europe itself, something we have never had, even in the old good Austro-Hungarian times, on such scale. It is a story of a success. And I believe that since this integration is going on, economically, at least economically, we see in numbers that the mutual trade between, for example, the Czech Republic and Poland has been growing since 2004 up. The same is the case of the other bilateral trade statistics. I think that the Central Europe could really become the hub of the European cooperation. The same was the case with the Benelux in the 20th century. So let's believe that Central Europe would become the Benelux of the 21st century.
Thank you very much, Vitek. I think that was a nice conclusion. You can definitely say that the European Union is a great success. And yeah, I would definitely share your opinion that if the future role of the Central Europe will even grow much more than is the current role, I think that's definitely the right direction also regarding the integration of other EU member states from Eastern and Southeastern Europe. At this point, I would like to thank you very much for sharing your views and your expertise and for joining us today for our CE podcast episode. Thank you very much.
Thank you. It was a pleasure.
And also many thanks to everyone who were listening to our episode. This was CEE, Central Europe Explained, before and after joining the EU, Persistent Challenges in Central Europe, an IDM podcast series powered by Erste Group. We are looking forward to welcome you to the next episode.
IDM Podcast.
Institut für den Donauraum und Mitteleuropa.
Institute for the Danube region and Central Europe.
European perspectives.
Regional actions.
Cooperation and expertise since 1953.